Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I have a really weird one. When I was around 8 years old and my grandfather was still alive, we'd go visit him in his cabin out in the woods in West Virginia every winter. It was pretty comfy for the most part. No internet, but I didn't know what the internet was at that point, so I didn't care. Warm fireplace, mounted animal heads and shit. My grandpa was a pretty nice guy, though he was kinda neurotic about the woods around him. He would always jump out of his chair at the tiniest sound outside, even though 90% of the time it was like a raccoon or something. This one time though, there was a blizzard supposed to be coming in. It was all my grandpa kept talking about the entire weekend. My older sister for some reason had instilled in me the belief that the best time to go sledding was right before a blizzard, when the snow was freshly falling. Idiot that I was, I believed her, and I left the house without telling anyone so I could experience the perfect sled. I cannot believe how much of a fucking moron I was. There was still a little bit of snow left on the ground from a few days prior, but it was mostly dirt at this point, so it was pretty easy to see the trail up to the top of the mountain. I took a flashlight with me just in case it got too dark, but it was overcast so I could still see well. I reached the top where we usually sled just as the big snowflakes started to fall, which meant the ground would be covered soon after. All I had to do then was wait. I was just sitting there waiting for the snow to fall like a dumb ass. After about 30 minutes of watching the snowfall, I started to get second thoughts. I started looking around a bit more. Over the mountain range, you could see the dark clouds rolling in, and I mean like dark gray. Everything else seemed lighter in comparison, which was the first onset of an eerie feeling. That's when I started noticing how weird things were getting. Usually when a storm is rolling in like that, the wind really picks up and the snow really comes down hard. The snow was coming down still as can be. There was absolutely no sound, other than my breathing. The sky started getting abnormally dark, but the snowy ground remained bright. Suddenly a wave of dread washed over me for some reason. The eeriness of the whole situation was getting more apparent to me. I started to realize that I hadn't seen a single animal on my way up the hill, not even a single squirrel, which were very common in the area. The whole place seemed dead. That's when I saw it. While looking around at the treeline, I saw a white fox standing there, obviously looking at me. It stood there motionless like I had caught it while walking into the woods. The more I looked at it, I was enraptured by it. It seemed so graceful and wild, like it was an embodiment of nature itself. I wanted to walk up to it, like it was compelling me to follow. It sat down in the snow, staring at me. Even though it had to be at least 20 yards away, it felt like it was right in front of me. There was some sort of reassuring feeling in its eyes. I glanced down at its mouth, which was opening and closing in a really weird way. It looked like it was whispering. I was almost about to get up and walk toward it until I heard a faint cry from the direction of my grandpa's house, which had to be my family calling my name. I turned my head to hear it better, and it indeed was. I realized how hard the snow was falling and how freezing I felt all of the sudden, like I had been in a trance and suddenly woke up. I wondered what the heck was going on until I realized. There are no white foxes in West Virginia. We had silver foxes, but they looked completely different to the one I was looking at, which looked like an Arctic fox. I turned back around to the fox. Dread shot through my body as I saw the fox standing on two legs, bipedal. It felt like a pit formed in my chest and my face and limbs all got really hot, and my legs started carrying me away down the trail before I could think. I had never ran that fast in my life, booking it past all the trees on the trail. I saw the familiar orange glow of my grandpa's porch light where he stood shouting my name. I fucking dove through the door before he could ask me where the fuck I'd been. I stayed inside for the rest of the stay and refused to look out any windows. I didn't even bother to go back and get the sled I had left on the hill when I booked it that night. After we went back home, I refused to go back to my grandpa's. I had told everyone what I saw, but they all thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Even my grandpa said he hadn't seen anything like that on the mountain. I kinda suppressed the memory of it for a while, wanting to believe it was a daydream, but that feeling of dread comes up whenever I see a picture of foxes. The feeling was all too real for a daydream. That's all I've got. My grandpa died last year in December. My parents and my sister went this week to sort through his belongings. They asked me if I wanted to go, but I once again refused. If I ever see that cabin again, it will be too soon.
Sheepsquatch, also known as the White Thing, is a woolly-haired cryptid reported across numerous counties in West Virginia, predominantly within the southwestern region of the state. The counties with the most sightings are Boone, Kanawha, Putnam and Mason, with a surge in sightings taking place in Boone County during the mid-1990s. It is described as being a quadruped about the size of a bear, with entirely white wool-like fur. It has a long and pointed head, similar to a dog but with long, saber-like teeth, and a single-point set of horns not dissimilar from those found on a young goat. Its forelimbs end in paw-like hands, similar to those of a raccoon but larger, while its tail is long and hairless like that of an opossum. It is reputed to smell like sulfur, which has been attributed through folklore to the beast being born within the TNT area in Mason County, like one of the Mothman theories, though this is not likely and instead may be a musk scent gland similar to those found in many species in the order Carnivora such as weasels and skunks.
Be me, roughly 10 or 11. Be not me, younger brother, parents and grandparents. We live on roughly 100 acres of property in rural West Virginia. Our houses are within 300 feet of each other. Small apartment complex filled with mostly crackheads nearby. Rest of the local neighborhood, 17 houses total, is upper middle class. Besides the neighborhood though, there's no genuine civilization for 15 miles in any direction. That said, to the north of our house is 15 miles of untouched, mostly unexplored forest. Literally 90% of these woods have probably never been seen by human eyes to my knowledge. Anyhow, before I was born, my grandfather cleared off most of the woodland from the property and found a pond in the process, which he stocked with fish. Used to go over and fish my grandfather all the time before he slowed down. Nostalgia my childhood. One day parents are out, mom is shopping and dad is at work. Brother and I are left in our grandmother's charge. I was still in that play outside acting like I'm John Halo himself phase, so ask my grandmother if I can go out. She agrees but tells me to stay close to the house. After about an hour of fucking around, randomly hear a voice. Turned in the direction I thought it came from, toward our house. Hear it again and immediately decide two things. For one, it's my mom's voice. For two, it's coming from our house or that general direction. Try to call back to her and start walking in that direction, thinking that she got back with the groceries and I just didn't notice. No response, just calls my name again. Wait, fuck the what? Realize two more things. Mom's car isn't in the driveway, the front door of the house is shut, and the voice is actually calling my name. Stop dead in my tracks and wait to hear the voice again. Yep, that's definitely my mom and she's definitely calling my name. Try to answer it again. No response. After a few seconds pause, it's my name again. Then I made one final realization. The voice isn't coming from the house, it's coming from the pond. Didn't really creep me out, just honestly confused me. Turned around and went back to the house. Heard the voice call my name one more time as I walked back inside. Told my grandmother what happened. She told me to stay put and went outside. Came back in after a few seconds and said to stay inside, it was getting late. It's 3 p.m. Asked if she heard anything. Said she didn't. So for all these years I've just assumed that I'm a fucking schizo, but recently at dinner we were talking about weird experiences and shit we've had over the years. I brought this up and my grandmother pulled me aside and told me something about that day she never has before. Grandmother walks outside, stands there for a few seconds, hears the voice call my name. She's genuinely confused, calls back to the voice using my mother's name. Voice then calls my grandmother's name. Grandmother comes back inside and tells me to stay inside because it's getting late, then immediately calls my mom. Mom is, in fact, still in town and won't be home for another 2 hours. So that's my story. Could have been a crackhead from the apartment complex, could have been a neighbor, but that's doubtful. To get to our house, specifically to get to the pond, you have to go pretty far out of your way. Literally no reason to be on the property. My grandmother and I both have really distinct names, so there's no honest way it was a fucking bird or some weird shit like that. Of all the folklore creatures that West Virginia is said to boast, the Bloodless Howler is one of the most bizarre. There have allegedly been sightings of this beast since 1929. It is said to have the head of a big cat and the body of a dog, and to regard Harrison County as a congenial habitat. Legend says it weighs 400 pounds. You will shoot at it in vain because it is bulletproof. Its victims have no blood around them, which is how it obtained its name. The combination of feline and canine characteristics would seem to rule it out as far as zoology goes, but my guess is that, if the beast indeed exists, it has features which resemble, but are necessarily, such characteristics. The bulletproof attribute may simply mean that hunters have shot at it, thought they had hit it and hadn't. However, we must not forget that we are dealing with West Virginia here, a state that some have argued is a window area where mysterious things can enter our world from other dimensions, so we should be chary about ruling things out.
Riding back from a friend's place in West Virginia, taking Highway 250 over a mountain through Washington Jefferson National Forest. I, being a dumb kid, think it's a good idea to ride a motorcycle at night over a fucking mountain. 2-lane highway and lots of turns. Slowly making my way up when I see the taillight ahead. Another motorcycle ahead of me past him. Stick my right hand out as I pass in greeting. No demon biker or anything, just a dude on a Harley wearing a brain bucket. Couldn't really see much else other than he had a black jacket and a pretty impressive ZZ Top beard going for him. Also had a Pennsylvania plate. Really strange to see another biker out at night here, but stranger things have happened. Crest Mountain coming down the slope, see a taillight in front of me. It's 1 lane here and not really supposed to pass, but bikers do it all the time. I come up next to him, realize it's the same ZZ Top looking dude. Pennsylvania plate and all. Sticks his left arm out as I go by. I don't really think much of it for a few seconds, then I realize there is no way this could have happened. I start getting really anxious, and look in my mirror. Dude is a little ways back. He's not chasing me or anything, just slowly receding in the distance. Consider hanging back to make sure it was the same guy, but decide to hightail it out of there instead. Make it down the mountain to stop at the first gas station I see, more to calm my nerves than anything else. I know I was just seeing things and that it was 2 different bikers, but still there is that anxiety that takes a while to go away. Realize bikers never ride by. Sure, there were a few turns down back country farm roads, but the likelihood of that happening at that time of night is slim to none. Make it home and never saw the 2 bikers or whatever that was again. Not very scary, but I still think about it whenever I'm riding through there.
Okay, so this happened last summer, but here goes. For the 4th of July, some friends and I decided to drive up to West Virginia. One of our pals has a cabin out there, so we packed some bags and planned on spending 3 nights in the forest. It wasn't much, but it was dry and had a flushing toilet, and there was some crazy lady down the mountainside who always had moonshine. We were sold. Billy, Brett and I drove out there together. Joe and Katie were already there. It was Joe's cabin, and they'd been there a day or 2. When we got there, Katie warned us not to leave our shit outside overnight. We could run around naked for all she cared. Wouldn't have been the first time, but anything related to food had to be burned completely or taken inside overnight. She said something had torn apart their trash. Probably a black bear, which wasn't much of a surprise since they'd been spotted all over the area. Back up a bit, halfway to the mountains, driving from DC, Billy realized he forgot the directions. Naturally, we did what anyone would and called his wife to read off the directions. She gave him shit, of course, as a typical nagging wife does, and the rest of us pretty much ragged on him the rest of the day. I could tell he was getting pretty tired of our shit, but he took it like a champ. Billy just sat there and smiled as we drove, his head down, reading off the directions he wrote down. Due to Billy's dumb ass, we got there about 2 hours late. It was now around 6 p.m., well after our first round of Jello shots were due, and we were all pretty hot and tired of being twisted up in that car with a metric ton of bullshit, half of which was Billy's essential camping gear. We got unloaded and I sat my ass down in a chair. I don't remember exactly what I said, we all said a lot of things, but I gave Billy some kind of shit about the campfire he was trying to light, and he got pissed. It's kind of hard to tell when sunset is in the forest, in the mountains, since you can't really see the sun, but it was starting to look like dusk. Billy set off on a one-man hike to cool his shit. Meanwhile, Joe and Katie fired up a grill and started cooking, while Brett and I passed out a few beers and strung up a hammock. In that order it was interesting. After a while, I realized it was getting pretty dark and Billy was still nowhere to be found. He set off with no flashlight, in a forest he'd never been to, alone, and even after several drinks I was wondering how much longer we should wait before trying to find him. The four of us were just discussing this when Billy showed up. I asked him where the hell he had been, and he said he'd just walked up the mountain a ways, then back down when he got tired. Whatever, it didn't make much sense, but then again, where would you go in a forest, besides to another part of the forest? We sat around the campfire for a while. Billy got there just in time because the chicken was just coming off the barbecue. We tossed around some jokes and bullshit, told a story or two, and had another round of drinks. I realized after a few minutes that Billy wasn't joining in since he got back. About 20 minutes, he'd just been standing there, staring at the campfire with this blank look on his face. It was a little unsettling. Actually, I can't really put my finger on it. But that's not what freaked me out the most. I looked Billy up and down, and he didn't look quite right. After a few drinks, I guess I hadn't paid much attention at first, but if you weren't looking at his face you'd swear it was someone else. His shoulders were a bit too thin. Billy spent some time in the Marines and took that shit seriously. His legs were too short, it almost looked like his shorts were sagging, but they weren't. He just didn't have the right proportions. He turned all of a sudden, kind of jerked his head around, and looked at me, and caught my stare. I really didn't know what to say, I just pretended to get distracted by something and looked away. Without much warning, Billy turned and started walking away pretty briskly. Brett asked him where the fuck he was going. It was his turn to share a story or whatever. Billy said something about having to piss and didn't even slow down. He walked out behind the cabin, which was strange, because he'd normally just whip it out on the nearest tree. I was pretty buzzed, so after a couple of minutes I figured maybe that was it, maybe I'd had a little too much of that backwoods brew, and maybe he's still pissed at us. Who knew? But then Billy came back to the campfire. He was completely out of breath. Katie caught on to it first. We just watched him walk around the cabin, which was uphill from us. He came back from the opposite way, almost like he circled the whole property and hiked back from the bottom of the road. Billy immediately started asking if the food was done, said he was starving, and started telling us about this tree stand he found that some hunter must have abandoned out in the forest. Joe asked him how he was hungry after downing 3 pounds of chicken 10 minutes ago, but he had no idea what Joe was talking about. I was getting pretty uneasy at this point. I had no idea what the hell was going on, but I knew that something wasn't right. I know for a fact, even now, that whoever I saw standing by the campfire wasn't Billy. His clothes were right, I guess, but he didn't really look or sound the same. I tried talking to Brett about it, but he was pretty wasted, and was having trouble finding his own pockets by then. It was useless. I don't remember going to bed, but I remember waking up. I crashed in the hammock and was the last one awake. I walked into the cabin and everyone else was already eating breakfast. Brett and Joe were pretty fucking hungover and didn't say much at all. Halfway through our meal, Katie asked me, kind of asleep, where I put that awesome shirt I'd been wearing. I had no clue what she was talking about. Maybe she had more to drink than I thought. But then Joe asked me, too. Apparently, sometime during the night, I'd walked into the cabin. I do not recall this. I was kind of scooting along, like my leg was asleep, which got everyone's attention, except Billy, who was out cold, and I guess I was wearing some kind of orange camo jacket. At this point I just knew they were fucking with me. I don't even own something like that. I said maybe it was Brett coming back from taking a piss, but no, they said, it was definitely me. They said I walked in, opened the cooler, and downed an entire pack of hot dogs before walking back out the door. I fucking hate hot dogs. What the hell? The rest of the day went fine. We kind of brushed off this shit that happened the night before. I had a feeling a couple of the others felt a little weird about it all, but nobody said anything. We just went about the day and had a good time. Katie caught Billy whacking off in the shower. Brett and I held Katie down while Billy gave her a lap dance. It was a good time, really more fun than we'd had in quite a while. About sundown, we broke out the fireworks. It's the 4th of July, after all, and we're not going to let that shit go without blowing something up. Out came the Jell-O shots, the tequila, and the hot dogs, or, for me, the marshmallows. It was party time. The guys and I wound up topless after a while, and Katie, embarrassed because Brett went streaking through the campsite, decided she was going to bed. She walked up to the cabin and we pretty much continued partying. More drinks went around, more snacks, more fireworks. We were just living the redneck dream, or whatever you'd call it. About halfway through our second Roman candle war, I noticed Katie standing next to me. It kind of startled me, but I was in the zone. Whatever, right? Maybe she felt left out. Brett and Joe were, as always, a little more drunk and a little more naked than the rest of us, so they tried to convince Katie to take her shirt off. She looked at Joe and laughed a little, tossing her head back. Billy grew some balls and joined in, telling her that he'd go streaking if she joined him. She always had a thing for Billy. Katie looked at Billy and laughed again, but it was weird, it was the same laugh. The same toss of her hair, the same little wince. I realized that's exactly what she did when Brett went charging through just an hour before. I didn't really have time to put things together before Joe made his move. He snuck up behind Katie and grabbed her shirt, trying to pull it up. I fully expected her to back away, to turn and run, or slap him across the face. But she didn't, she just kind of froze up. She stopped breathing, and the strangest part of all was her shirt. I can't really describe it in a way that does it justice, but it was like her shirt was a part of her. It seemed to be connected, like it pulled on her body when Joe yanked it up. It couldn't come off because it was a piece of Katie herself or whatever was standing there in her place. Joe, even as drunk as he was, looked confused for a moment, then started freaking the fuck out. He later told me that when he grabbed that shirt, or what he thought was a shirt, it retracted, it pulled itself from his hands, almost like a muscle contracting, trying to escape. Katie, or what looked like Katie, stood there, silent, motionless, and Joe started to run. I had a pretty good idea why he was running, and I think Brett saw, too, but Billy was a little thicker in the skull. We grabbed him and told him to head back to the cabin, back inside. He tried to grab Katie, but I yelled to leave her, pulled his hand away, and we got inside as fast as we could. We weren't even being chased. It was just one of those moments when we realized we were out in the elements, exposed on all sides, with something we didn't understand bearing down on us. We were about to fill Billy in when Katie hopped up from the couch, almost in panic, asking what the fuck was going on. I kind of recoiled, wondering if I could trust her. Who the hell was she? Who the hell was outside? What the fuck was going on? Billy asked her how the hell she ran inside so fast, then he started freaking out with the rest of us. Don't think he understood why though. Joe grabbed her shirt and her shorts and tugged on them and asked her what her birthday was. He was in a full-blown fight or flight mode still, and she answered him right, thank God. She was the real deal, and confused as fuck. She must have thought we'd been smoking something, even as we tried to explain everything, and Billy was trying to figure it all out too. Joe tried filling her in, but it wasn't much use. Billy looked out the window and got Brett's attention, and Brett got Katie's attention. He said if she doesn't believe us, then what the fuck is outside? Katie, Joe and I joined the others at the window and looked down the hill towards the campfire, and there was the creature, still Katie, apparently, staring straight at us. Katie thought it was a joke, maybe something we rigged up to look like her, until it lurched forward and doubled over. It hit the ground on all fours and made a number of short yipping sounds, which sounded somewhat like that laugh again, only when it stood back up it wasn't Katie. It was me. We all kind of freaked the fuck out. I mean, the clothes were right, the hair was right. It seemed to take a moment for the proportions to work out. It had my face, but Katie's hips, until it twisted, almost like dislocating its hips, and it stood up taller to match my figure. About that time a shot rang out. Joe had a rifle stashed over the door and apparently decided he'd had enough of this shit. The creature, whatever the fuck that was, laughed one more time, with a jittery little head motion, kind of like before, and then walked backwards into the woods. We were wide awake until the sun came up. We packed up just our clothes and whatever we could carry. The food, hammock, and all of our non-essential shit is still out there in the forest, and as far as I'm concerned I can live without it. I'm never going back. Fuck camping.
Live in Virginia. Do volunteer medical work in West Virginia. Driving my Corvette heading towards Glenville. It's about 11 p.m. and I've been driving for a few hours. Been holding in a piss for a while and really need to go. Get off the next exit. Fucking nothing but woods and an abandoned gas station. Pull in and drive around the lot to make sure no one is there. Just some old pickup trucks and an old big rig. Park, open my door, step out and piss while looking around because I'm creeped out. Finish and get back in my car. Checking my phone and have a voicemail. Listen to it. Turn car back on. What is that? See my brake lights reflecting off of something. Oh shit, it's the old pickup truck I saw and it slowly moved closer to me. As I put it into drive, the pickup turns on its lights and guns it towards me, trying to cut me off. He blocks me from the exit closest to the freeway. There's an exit to the right which I take. To the left is the freeway, but the truck is over that way and could try to block the lanes or ram me. Go right instead further onto the country road. It tries following but I floor it and lose him. Scared the whole time that this was their plan all along and that there's a roadblock or ambush up ahead. Took me nearly an hour to get back onto the freeway. Scariest shit in my life. Although I wonder why the fuck they'd go after a Corvette. No way their old truck had a chance of outrunning me. Anyway, I'm guessing they probably wait for tired big rigs to pull in and the driver goes to sleep, then they steal his cargo.
No West Virginians here? I'm in the southernmost part, so I'm not around the major stuff, Mothman, Flatwoods Monster. I figured you guys have heard about them, but I'll elaborate if need be, but I have a story of my own that happened in my own little area. Couple years ago I had a brief thing with this stoner hippie chick that I worked with at a shitty part-time grocery store. Never met her before I worked with her, despite her living literally 2 minutes away from me her entire life. Combination of back roads and being a shut-in. Anyway, she came from this really eccentric family that was all about talking to spirits and herbal healing and overall just really strange stuff once you take into account the extremely right-winged conservative area I come from. So we're talking about cryptids and spirits and spooky shit one day and she tells me about something she just referred to as creatures. She described them as massive, upright wolf, bear-looking things that roam the mountains here. She said they very rarely reveal themselves and are mischievous fellows, but have no interest in hurting people. She also said they can talk to people telepathically in perfect English, and that her ex was friends with a tribe of them before. She said that he'd go hunting, kill a deer and clean it, then leave the scraps for them. She said that these things have been around for as long as she can remember, and she has a friend who saw one when he was younger. Said that the thing emerged from the tree line, picked up his bicycle and crushed part of it, then ran off. Apparently for shits and giggles, because as mentioned, they don't want to hurt anyone. Couple weeks after she told me all that and I had a chance to digest it all, my mind went back to various times when people I knew told me about similar things, and I had several, oh shit, moments because it finally clicked with me. My great-grandpa always told my mom about giant, hellhounds, that lived around here and would chase you if you were too far from home, and a friend of mine spent the night with me once and left really super early in the morning, and I woke up to texts from him the next day saying, "Dude, holy fuck, I was leaving your house and saw this fucking dog thing at the edge of the woods, but then it just disappeared." Then just last year, I was out feeding my dog behind my house and heard this weird-ass owl call from the treeline. It was an easy 100 yards from my house, so I didn't think anything of it. Well, a couple seconds go by and I hear it much closer, like maybe 70-ish yards away. I'm still behind the house so I can't see what's actually making the noises. Then it's even closer. Then I hear it another time just on the other side of the house and I nope the fuck inside because whatever was making those noises cleared a relatively large distance in about 10 seconds.
This happened almost 2 years ago exactly. My friend was taking flight lessons out of Martinsburg, West Virginia that summer and liked to fly out over the mountains. One day while flying towards the mountains he saw a little half-built house in the middle of a field on a back roads. After he gets home he calls me and asks if I want to go investigate it with him that night. Being an adventurer I agree. We finally got to the road at about 10:30 p.m. The road is paved, but his car nearly takes up both lanes since the road is so narrow and winding. We both notice a road sign with an inverted cross spray painted on it. Think it's just local kids fucking around so we continue. No houses at all on this road which seems strange. Only hay fields, cornfields, and woods. Finally arrive at the field where the house is. Pull off the road about 6 feet into the field where nothing is going except weeds. Being 90 degrees out that day, we had the AC on and windows up. My friend shuts the car off and we step out. Both of us immediately smell something dead. While getting out of the car I nearly stepped on a chicken carcass without a head. We both think it's strange but decide to look for the half-built house. My friend says he thinks they stopped building since it was overgrown with weeds. As we walked farther into the field we noticed more and more dead carcasses. Deer, more chicken, rabbits, etc. Most of which were already decomposing, but some looked very fresh. The carcasses were all torn apart. Limbs were scattered everywhere and the whole place smelled like death. We were getting concerned at this point but found a party site near the back of the field so we pressed on. There were a few lawn chairs, a beer pong table which had been knocked over, empty beer cans and beer cases, but also a few half-full beer cases and blankets and sleeping bags which looked like they had been left behind in a hurry. We took the beer and were joking around and had almost forgotten about the carcasses. We realized that the party looked like it had been abandoned in a hell of a hurry. Why didn't anyone take the beer, sleeping bags or chairs with them? We got kinda spooked when we thought something had to scare these guys pretty good to just haul ass out of a party and leave everything behind, so we decided to leave. We both thought we heard something moving slowly in the woods behind the field. After we were on the way home, we both admitted we felt like we were being watched. The next day we were talking about it again and we got braver and decided to go back with a baseball bat and a gun in the evening before it got dark. We got to the field again and were shocked to see nails and broken glass all over the only place we could park. Which hadn't been there the night before, and a wooden post had been set up that said "No trespassing" and smeared with blood with a fresh decapitated chicken laying in front of the sign.
The northern West Virginia Creek Bend. Site of the Smith homestead. This area in rural northern West Virginia. is extremely isolated and most locals associate this area with hauntings and a rumored mass grave. Though theories include clan murders, railroad accidents in the area, and drownings, no one really knows. The area is mostly silent due to its distance from any major road and its extreme lack of animals. Even eerier is the fact that 4 spotlights around the homestead are ran 24/7, even though the house is only used by the Smith family as a hunting cabin once every couple years. Recently, me and my friends have tried fishing in this area and have come across a couple abandoned campsites and stacks of firewood, but no sign of fire pits or burning.
Okay, so I'll post on X. I used to be a 911 dispatcher in a small rural county in northern West Virginia. It involved sitting in a room locked by a magnet which is in a little building connected to the county courthouse. By law, I wasn't allowed to leave without being charged with abandonment of my post or whatever. I sat in a chair, answered 911 calls, sheriff's department calls, talked on a radio, worked a computer, etc., etc. The surveillance cameras for the entire courthouse as well as cameras that looked outside in the parking lot, Main Street, etc. were in the office. Midnights were from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., and at that time on a weekday in a small town the downtown area is empty except for me sitting in my little room. There was nobody there really except maybe some cleaning staff who stayed late, but all were gone by around 1 a.m. So, I am sitting there one slow night, messing around on my laptop, and I get bored and decide to play with the cameras. Which were the 360-degree black ball cameras you normally see. There is an old maintenance steam tunnel that runs under the building, but it isn't used anymore, but due to some break-ins from the outside, had a camera in it. It was the beginning of the shift. There was a janitor in the courthouse. So I followed him with the camera and shit, messing around. The cameras were in night vision, so everything had a green tint, but in the steam tunnel I saw the camera shake, like it had been hit with wind, or something, and I saw the door to the front of the courthouse on my camera bounce like a gust of wind had just blown against it. I thought this was weird but blew it off and went back to looking for the janitor working in the courthouse, but he was gone. The lights were still on in the office he was working in, but he was gone. It was at this time that the elevator that leads up to the second floor, where I worked, kicked on. These aren't ordinary elevators. You need a key code to get into the elevator, and then you need a key. To get to the floor you want to go to, there are no buttons. So I thought it was the janitor coming up to see me about something. As it reached my floor from the basement floor where you get on, the doors opened and it was empty. This scared me. That elevator doesn't move on its own. It never has, and it's impossible for anyone to move it because all the main controls for it were in my office and I definitely hadn't hit any of the buttons for it. I hear a knock on the door of the office, and I pop the lock and open it. The janitor is standing there, white as a ghost, and he walks into the dispatch room, a crime, and closes the door behind him. He knows he isn't supposed to do this, but he really didn't look like he gave a fuck. I asked him basically, what the fuck are you doing, man? And he looks at me and asks me,
Did you see that?
I of course ask what. He replies,
The doors down there, in the courthouse, they moved and I felt something go past me, like someone running really fast, headed toward the elevator. When I heard the elevator move I knew something was up, so I booked it.
He was very upset and I told him about the elevator moving up to my floor by itself and he about died on the spot. He resigned the next day after working there for 20-some years. When I told my boss about this he said,
Yeah, this used to be the county jail, you know. Some guy hero himself in that storage room right beside your office when it was a cell.
I thought, holy fucking shit. I have to sit in this haunted courthouse to do my job, and I hated it. I spent the rest of my time there looking over my shoulder, and trying to never look at the cameras unless I had to. Lots of scary stories came from there, including a lot of ghost calls, which are calls that originate and end immediately, but in a 911 center, the phone never stops ringing until you pick it up. If you call 911 and hang up, the phones on their end will just ring and ring and ring until they answer.
To start off with, here's a story from my mom. It isn't paranormal, but it is freaky as shit, be my mom. Greater than 15 to 16 at this point. Living in a well-to-do part of the Eastern Panhandle. One night, right as the family, my mom, grandma, and grandpa, settle into bed, they hear gunshots. Right next to their fucking house. The shooter was screaming something, but nobody could tell at the time. All they could figure out was that the shooter was on the opposite side of the house from the main door. My grandma was great at handling a crisis, so she had the best idea of getting everyone out safely. First, she called the cops. Then, she kicked my mom out of the house. Later, my mom asked her why the fuck she did that, and she said,
"I figured you was a smaller target."
Anyway, eventually the whole family comes out, after my mom and grandpa basically force grandma out, and they run off to a neighbor's house to wait. After a while, the cops take a break from buying crack just long enough to arrest the guy. Dude was a 12-year-old kid who was trying, poorly, to kidnap a geriatric neighbor. His biggest fantasy was kidnapping and killing an old woman. So, the kid somehow gets off with a slap on the wrist, like a month of juvie or some shit, but it became a joke in the family. Up until a few years later when it really went to shit. Few years later. Mom is about 20 or so. Just graduated from high school, life is good. She gets a call from her folks.
"Do you remember that guy who shot up our house a few years back?"
Mom chuckles, like I said it was a joke at this point, but my grandma shushes her.
"This isn't funny."
Apparently my grandma was doing her usual shit, smoking pot and feeding the iguanas, when she heard someone dragging something out on the road. She looked out and saw a guy dragging a chick by her hair, leaving a blood trail down the street. Dude looked like he was in a fucking trance or some shit. In his free hand, he was carrying a knife. So obviously, she calls the cops and triple locks the doors. Eventually, she realizes this was the same kid from last time. The cops follow his trail off-road to a creek. Apparently the dude kidnapped a young teen, beat her unconscious, and took her to the creek to assault and kill her. They arrested him before he managed to slit her throat. There was a brief controversy over how the fuck this dude, who's had a thing for assaulting and killing people for years, was basically left alone until he actually harmed someone. Like I said, not really paranormal, but it freaked me out hearing about it.
I'll share the best one first. I haven't attempted to write anything spooky in a few years. My first creepypasta ended up on Crappypasta, so most of this may have some inconsistencies. Me and my family lived in a double wide in a town 15 minutes outside of Romney atop a mountain from 2005 to 2008. We shared a 6-acre property with my grandparents in which they had a chalet that was a little ways up the hill. On either side of each house were trees. However, the left-hand side looking at the front of the buildings went into the woods much deeper than the left. This is important later. It was the start of the recession and my stepdad had a slightly less desirable job at the time repossessing cars. Most of us really wanted out of the sticks, but due to funds we just couldn't afford to rent a place to live, let alone the move. Given that we were in a more depressing section of the Appalachians, us older kids were bored out of our wits. My mom was always stressed out with caring for smaller children. Though when she ever got time to herself she was very playful and had a sense of adventure. That said, she never really watched any channels aside from the travel discovery channels. Ghost Hunters was a popular series at the time and it was one of her favorites. She recollected events from her childhood as she would experience spirits talking from within the walls and how good she became at astral projection. So when the idea of holding a seance was brought up before me and my 14-year-old sister, opinions were mixed. Pick related. The double wide got scrapped due to a mold infestation and my grandparents moved out a few years later. My grandparents were Catholics and hated the idea of summoning any sort of paranormal entities, but told Mom as long as we didn't use a Ouija board, we were in the clear. Eventually, as she and my sister got the time to do anything else, we sat down at the coffee room table with a rubber ball and a candle with the lights off to begin what would be a string of on and off paranormal episodes. Nothing was really said besides the "what is your name" and "how did you die" malarkey. But we did have a camera and a voice recorder, and we were able to pick up the voices of two little girls. I can't remember what they said other than their names, laughing and begging for mercy from whom I assumed was their father. But what stood out to me the most during our little investigation was a photo taken of our back living room window. A forlorn-looking older woman dressed in Victorian-era clothing sat staring dead at the camera, posing with her arm propped up on some sort of bar. Aside from the three initial voices we heard the night of the first seance, we'd occasionally leave the recorder on for as long as it could record for, then play it back whenever it stopped. On top of this, our beds would shake when the washing machine was off during early hours of the morning. And my younger sister would hear what sounded like my uncle, who was still alive, talking to her through the wall. It carried on for months afterwards and only stopped when we all got together for another session and we ordered them to find the light. We heard the same voices over the recorder one final time talk about the light, and we never heard of them again. I know that was a little anticlimactic, but around the same time this all happened, my great-grandmother died from cancer. As the recorded voices had no real explanation, with a little research, Mom found out the property we lived on was used as a sort of medical grounds for soldiers in the Civil War. The voice heard by the younger kids was re-identified as the voice of my late great-grandfather, who my uncle sounded eerily like. You may still be wondering about the woods I mentioned earlier. Around the same time as the fiasco mentioned above, we stumbled across a news article on the web about a boy who went missing in the early 90s that was presumed dead by falling into a well. So, the police checked every well in the county and came up with nothing of interest. Long story short, Mom remembered there was a big one not far back in the woods and found there was no sort of lid to cover it. Putting two and two together, they walked back to the house and never said anything about it, and for the longest time I thought that maybe there was a sort of dual haunting. If you'd like more information on the kid that went missing and is considered killed, search for Victor Dwight Shoemaker Jr., and you'll come across articles and conspiracies about him. Again, sorry for the inconsistencies and some seemingly random junk thrown in, but much of it is a blur, and as I recall, we didn't discover many physical artifacts explaining what we experienced. Maybe it was for the better.
I'd like to start off by saying that I don't have a fucking clue why I'm posting this on X, or really, at all. Maybe I'm afraid of dying, or something. The events described in this story happened a month and a half ago, in Shenandoah, West Virginia, although I typed this up about 2 weeks ago. I just haven't really had the guts to post this until what happened yesterday. The story starts in late March, when my family went to go visit our relatives, who invited us up to celebrate one of them, Desiree, getting like $2,000 in some scratch-off lottery thing. They live in this really fucking shitty part of Shenandoah that people from Charlestown, Shepherdstown, and Ranson, basically the least rednecky parts of West Virginia, like to call Squalor Holler. It's way up on the mountain, and exactly like how everyone pictures it when they hear about it. Nothing but ramshackle shacks, rusty-ass rebuilt trailers, everything fucking covered in decades-old Christmas decorations because they're all too busy being smelly rednecks to ever clean up. Real deliverance shit, just no rivers or canoes. The relatives we were visiting are absolutely confirmed inbreeders, all cousins fucking each other. We don't refer to them as aunt, uncle, whatever, just relatives. Not terrible people or anything, Just absolutely cartoonish, depressing hillbilly stereotypes. So anyway, we're up here in this god-forsaken trailer, it sucks. There's like 8 of them, plus me, my dad, my mom, and my sister. About 2 hours in, my mom takes my cell phone so that I can focus on the family time together. Which is bullshit. All we did the whole time was eat TV dinners and be forced to watch NASCAR and shit. After like 6 hours of this shit, about 10 minutes before we're supposed to leave, it starts raining. We know how treacherous the roads can get up on the mountain, so we decide to wait for the rain to die down. Flash forward 2 hours later, it's fucking dark as hell, 10 o'clock, and there's a flood warning for the area. I have my phone back by this time, no reception, though, of course. I'm playing Tetris and Texas Hold'em and stuff, when suddenly I hear my dad start losing his shit in the next room. I walk over, and it turns out that they let slip that they'd buried their kid, Thomas, outside, and apparently were afraid the rain would wash up his body or some other horseshit. The kid was like 6, he was attacked by a dog, and they never told the cops. Just fucking buried him like he was a family pet. My dad's flipping his shit, and rightfully so, because, you know, we live in the 21st century and all. So our relatives all say they'll sort it all out in the morning. My parents tell me and my sister to stay in the same room as them during the night, and we do. None of us really suspected that they'd killed Thomas or anything, since they're really peaceful. They didn't even own any guns aside from this one old-timey double-barrel shotgun they had on a mantle. Nevertheless, we were creeped the fuck out, and intended to tell the cops in the morning once we got to town. So, it was like 3 in the morning, I couldn't sleep. Power had gone out for the 5th time or so, and I'm not able to charge my dead phone. Worst part is, I could see Thomas's little grave right outside the window. Little cross on it and everything, and I assumed the kid couldn't have been buried deep at all since they were so worried about him just washing up out of the grave. So I was just fixated on it, kept being drawn to looking out the window. And then I saw the fucking worst thing in my life. Something was creeping through the trees toward the house. I stared at it for a while, but couldn't get a good look at it since it was raining and the brush was so thick. For a few minutes I assumed it was 2 really pale horses, kind of ambling through the woods side by side. But then it walked into the moonlight, and I saw that it was all one thing, like a kind of human torso, but wider. It finally stepped into full view, and I saw it had something like 6 legs, kind of somewhere between a beetle's legs and a horse's legs. 2 arms, right where someone would normally have them, but they were about a half a foot longer than any normal man's arms. It had a bald head, but the face looked like some sort of fucking bizarre masquerade ball kind of mask. This fucking clenched up, furrowed forehead, and a nose that looked sort of like a crow's or a raven's beak. It didn't have eyes, either. Just like the depressions where eyes would go. It looked like it had a human mouth, underneath its proboscis. What still strikes me to this day is that it seemed to have a male genitals, too. Like right on the abdomen where a normal person's would be. The thing moved sort of gracefully, and made these soft thumping noises when it moved. It must have been like 7, 8 feet tall, but sounded like it weighed maybe only 150 pounds at most. It starts walking towards Thomas's grave, and then I finally snap out of whatever trance I was in, and just scream. My mom is the first to wake up, and I tell her to look out the window. She rushes over, and doesn't really seem to understand what she's looking at. After a minute though, the thing bends down and starts pawing at the grave with its hands. My dad and Jasper rush in, and Jasper just fucking loses his shit. Screams like a little girl, runs back out of the room, yelling for his father, yelling, "It's outside, it came and it's outside." I look back and see the thing is digging furiously at the ground, kicking up huge mounds of dirt. I hear these sounds of feet running around the house. I think they were looking for the shotgun. The thing reaches into the hole and grabs up what I assume was Thomas's body by the leg in one hand. The thing kind of gallops back into the woods, snapping all these branches and shit, and then that's when we all hear it. A kid crying. The sound of a child sobbing and crying, from the direction that the thing took off in. We left as soon as the rain let up, at like 5 a.m. I don't even think we told anyone at the house. Drove straight back to Ranson, only stopping for gas. No one said a word to each other. My family refuses to speak about what happened. I tried to bring it up once, just to make sure it was real. My dad told me to shut the fuck up, so I did. I typed this up about 3 weeks after it happened, but just saved it to a notepad file and left it alone. Never mentioned it to any of my friends or anything, just tried to erase it from my mind by getting absolutely fucked up drunk whenever my thoughts lingered on it. It mostly worked, up until yesterday. See, I work at this gas station in Ranson, from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. I work the register, keep the place clean, and take out the trash. Yesterday, when I was bringing the trash bags over to the back of the building for the dude in the morning to take care of, I heard what I had assumed to be some junkie fucking around in the dumpster. I yelled at whoever it was a couple of times to get the hell out before I called the cops. But as I walked towards the source of the noise, I suddenly heard those same footsteps. That soft thump thump, hooves or feet, or whatever the hell they were. I turned right around and went back into the store and hid behind the counter. I look over at the outside security monitor and see some kind of movement from just off screen, something huge casting a shadow and moving. Catch a glimpse of, I don't know, an elbow or something. A pale limb, darting in and out of view. It had to have been the same thing. I waited for it to leave, and after a while, it did. I woke up behind the counter at 6 a.m. this morning to my manager giving me this fucking look like I'm a drug addict or something. Went home, typed the rest of this up. And that's about it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.